The sound of the shovel was the only truth. It was a dull, heavy chop against the stubborn earth of Wyoming. The ground was frozen, even this late in spring, and the wind had a spiteful edge that cut through Clara's thin wool shawl. She stood alone, save for the preacher and the 3 townsfolk who had bothered to come. Preacher Davies read the words without looking at her, his voice droning into the gray, brittle sky. He wanted to be back by his fire, and it showed. Mrs. Gable was there, her face a mask of social obligation, and Mr. Finch from the hardware store, likely calculating the unpaid bill her father, Silas, had left behind. When the preacher finished, he cleared his throat and nodded once at Clara. A dismissal. The grave diggers, hired for the task, began their work of hiding the simple pine box. Clara watched the clods of dirt strike the wood. That sound. It was the sound of final. Her father had not been a warm man, but he had been a wall, a thin one, between her and this. Now the wall was gone, and the wind blew right through. She turned, her boots unsteady on the rutted track, and walked back toward the town, toward the cabin that was now hers, and hers alone. The cabin was cold. The hearth was swept clean, but there was no fire. It felt wrong to light one. She sat at the small table her father had built, his ledger book open before her. He had not been a man for sentiment, but he had been meticulous in his failings. She read the names, the ink scratching across the cheap paper. Mr. Halloway, General Store, $31.50. Mr. Rafferty, Golden Nugget Saloon, $40. $40. She stared at the number. It was a fortune, an impossible sum. He had drunk himself into this debt and left her to settle the score. There were others, smaller, but those 2 were the mountains. The next morning, she brushed her hair back, pulling it tight against her scalp, and put on her father's old coat, the sleeves rolled up. She walked the half-mile into town, her chin high, though her stomach felt hollow with dread. Mr. Halloway was polishing the glass of his candy jar when she entered. The store smelled of coffee beans, cured leather, and the sharp scent of the cheese wheel under its cloth. "Miss Clara," he said. He did not smile. He was a small man, with eyes that never seemed to blink. "Mr. Halloway, I'm here about my father's account." "A sad thing, his passing," Halloway said, his rag moving in slow circles. "A hard thing for a young woman to be left." He looked her up and down, a slow appraisal that made her skin crawl. It was a new look. She was no longer Silas's daughter. She was a woman, alone and in debt. "I intend to pay it," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "All $31. "Cash, of course," he said. "I have no cash, sir, but I can work. I can mend your stock. I can clean the store. My stitches are small." Halloway stopped polishing. He looked at her hands, resting on the counter. They were already rough from lye soap and hauling water. "Mending, you say?" He tapped the glass. "It will take a long time to work off such a sum with needle and thread." "I am a hard worker," she said. He finally nodded. A curt, unpleasant movement. "We will try it, but I can't extend you any more credit. Clara, not until this is settled. You understand. Business is business." She understood. It meant that whatever food she needed, she would have to earn, stitch by stitch. She left the store and paused on the boardwalk, breathing in the dusty air. The saloon was next. This was harder. She had never set foot inside the Golden Nugget. Her father had forbidden it, one of his few firm rules. She pushed open the batwing doors. The smell hit her first. Stale whiskey, sweat, and something sour she couldn't name. It was dark, the windows thick with grime. Mr. Rafferty was behind the bar, wiping glasses with a dirty towel. He was a large man, his belly straining a stained apron. "We ain't open," he grunted, not looking up. "Mr. Rafferty, I am Clara, Silas's girl. He stopped. He looked at her. His gaze was heavier than Holloway's, blunt and assessing. I know who you are. Come about the money, have you? Yes, sir. $40? That's right. A heavy tab for a man who didn't have 2 dimes to rub together. I will pay it. Like I told Mr. Holloway, I can work. Rafferty laughed. A short, sharp bark. Work? What work you planning on doing here, girl? We ain't got laundry. His eyes ran over her again, lingering on the shape of her beneath the heavy coat. The girls who work here, they work nights. Clara's face burned. She felt the blood rush to her cheeks, hot with shame and fury. I will scrub your floors. I will wash your windows. I will do it in the morning. Before you open, I will not be one of your girls. Rafferty sized up her defiance. Maybe it amused him. Scrub the floors, eh? It's a filthy job. Sawdust and spit and whatever the boys left behind. I don't mind filth, she said, her voice tight. Fine, he said, tossing the rag down. 6 in the morning. Every day. I'll take 50 cents off his tab every time you show. At this rate, you'll be paid up by Christmas. He grinned, showing brown teeth. She nodded, turned, and pushed her way back into the clean air, her hands shaking. She had not begged. She had negotiated, but it felt like a different kind of defeat. It was on that walk back, her mind racing with calculations of soap and scrubbing, that the Cowboys saw her. The Circle K drive had just pushed its herd north, and the men were flush with pay and thirsty for trouble. They were lounging on the rail outside the saloon, smoking and spitting, their spurs ringing every time they shifted their weight. They watched her approach. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the end of the street, on the pale line of the plains beyond the last building. She could feel their attention, a physical weight. She was not beautiful in the way of the saloon girls. With their painted faces and bright satin, her beauty was in the bone, in the stubborn set of her jaw and the way she moved. A weary grace that came from a life of hard work. Her dress was faded calico, patched at the elbows, but it was clean. Her chestnut hair was pulled back so tightly it emphasized the sharp, clean lines of her face. As she passed, a low whistle cut the air. That's the one, a cowboy named Sully muttered to his friends. Silas's girl, all alone in that cabin now? She's a proud one, another said, taking a drag from his cigarette. Walks like she owns the street. Pride's the first thing to break when the pantry's empty, Sully said, his eyes following her until she turned the corner. She's a fine-looking thing. Once you scrape the trail dust off, bet she's lonely. She looks more like she'd sooner gut you than talk to you, his friend laughed. That's the kind I like, Sully said, grinning. A little fight. That night, the Golden Nugget was loud with the sound of men shedding the misery of a 2-month drive. The piano hammered out a tinny tune, drowned every few minutes by a roar of laughter or a curse. Sully slammed his empty whiskey glass on the bar, signaling Rafferty for another. He threw a silver dollar down. Boys, he shouted, getting the attention of the half-dozen Circle K men at his table. I'm putting a wager down. On what? One asked. Your ability to stand up by midnight? On the little dove we saw today, Clara. The table went quiet for a beat, then broke into knowing smirks. She's not for betting on. Sully, she's a respectable woman, one said, using his fingers to make quotes in the air. Respectable and poor is just a locked door waiting for the right key, Sully countered, leaning in. She's alone. She's in debt. It's only a matter of time. So, what's the wager? I say I can have her, Sully said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rumble. Woo her, win her, persuade her to share my blanket, before the month is out. She'll slap you sideways. Another cowboy, a young man named Jesse, said, Maybe, but I'm a charming man when I set my mind to it. I'll bet $20 I'm the first. I'll take that bet, another man, Boone, slammed his hand down. I say she's too stuck up. No one wins her. I say I can win her first, Sully said, tapping his chest. Any man here is welcome to try. Whoever beds her and can prove it takes the pot. We all put in $5. Men started digging in their pockets. It was a game. She was the prize. Silver dollars clinked onto the sticky bar top. Rafferty, who had heard it all, swept the coins into a glass jar and set it on the shelf behind him. The pot stands at $45, Rafferty announced, his voice booming. Gentlemen, the game is on. Clara, ignorant of the jar holding her dignity, fell into a rhythm of crushing exhaustion. Her life became a cycle of lie, thread, and filth. At 5 a.m, she rose in the dark, splashed icy water on her face, and walked to the saloon. For an hour, she scrubbed. She swept up cigarette butts, cigar ash, and stray playing cards. She mopped the floorboards, fighting the sticky residue of spilled beer and the stench of vomit in the corner by the privy door. Rafferty would sit at the bar, watching her, silent, drinking black coffee. When she finished, he would nod, and she would leave, her hands raw and smelling of stale whiskey. She would walk to Mrs. Gable's house, or the banker's house. There, she took in laundry. She hauled water from their wells, boiled the sheets in a great iron pot in the yard, scrubbed collars and cuffs on a washboard until her knuckles were scraped and bleeding. She hung the heavy, wet cotton on the lines, her arms aching. The wealthy women of the town paid her in coin, but barely looked at her. Then, she would go to Holloway's. She'd sit in the back room by the window, the only light, and mend. She sewed split seams on canvas trousers, replaced buttons on shirts, patched holes in woolen blankets. Holloway would check her work, holding the stitches up to the light, and mark a small amount off the ledger. She ate little, beans and cornmeal, mostly. She was always tired, always cold, but she was paying the debt. She was surviving. A week into this new life, Elijah Gray returned to the Cross K Ranch. He was not like the other hands. He was older, perhaps 30, perhaps 40. It was hard to tell. The West aged men quickly. He had been gone for months. No one knew exactly where. Some said trapping in the high mountains. Others said he'd been working a claim near the border. He simply appeared one day, riding his gray gelding, leading a mule packed with his sparse gear. He limped, the result of an old brake that had set wrong, and he carried a scar, a puckered, silver mark just under his ribs on his left side, from a bullet he'd taken years ago. It ached when the wind turned cold, which was often. Elijah was a man of few words. He did his work, tended his horse, and kept to the shadows of the bunkhouse. The other men, loud and young, mostly left him alone. He had a stillness about him that they mistook for meekness, but it was something else entirely. It was a deep, settled quiet, the kind a man gets after seeing too much. That night, he went into town for a bottle of liniment for his horse and a quiet beer for himself. He stood in the back of the Golden Nugget, away from the piano, nursing the glass. He heard the wager. It was no longer a secret. It was a running joke. She told me to mind my own business, Boone was complaining, rubbing his jaw where Clara had nearly slapped him for offering to carry her non-existent parcels. I offered her a pretty ribbon from Holloway's, Sully boasted. She looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her boot. She's playing hard to get. Sully, raise your stakes. Oh, I plan to, Sully said. She's just figuring out her price. Every woman has one. Elijah watched them over the rim of his glass. He watched the jar, half full of coins. He saw Rafferty, polishing the bar, listening with a faint smirk. Elijah looked at the faces of the men, boys. Really, despite their trail-worn faces, they were playing a game with a person's life, thinking it was harmless sport. He had seen what this kind of sport did to people. He finished his beer, set the glass down gently, and walked out. The limp was more pronounced in the cold night air. Clara sensed the shift in the town. The men were watching her. Before, they had ignored her. Now, their eyes followed her everywhere. Sully tipped his hat, his smile too wide, his eyes too bold. "Morning, Miss Clara. A fine day to be walking." Boone tried to stop her on the boardwalk. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be carrying those. Well, you shouldn't be walking alone. Let me escort you." She sidestepped him, her face impassive. "I know the way, thank you." They were flies, buzzing, landing, relentless. She didn't understand the sudden, coordinated attention. She only knew it made her feel hunted. It was different from Holloway's oily appraisal or Rafferty's blunt leering. This was a game, and she was the ball. She grew sharper, her words clipped, her gaze like ice. Then she met Elijah. She was leaving Holloway's, her day's mending done. When she almost collided with him, he was coming out, a small sack in his hand. He stepped back quickly, favoring his left leg, to let her pass. She stopped. He was tall, and the brim of his hat was pulled low, but she could see his eyes. They were gray, like the sky before a snow. He looked at her, and his gaze was quiet. He was not smiling. He was not assessing her value or guessing at her vulnerability. He was just looking. He saw the smudge of soot on her cheek, the raw redness of her knuckles clutching her coat. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low, a rumble. He held her gaze for a second. In that second, she felt, for the first time in weeks, that she was not a prize. She was just a person, standing on a boardwalk. "Sir?" She nodded and stepped around him. She walked away, but the encounter stayed with her. He was one of them, a cowboy, dust on his boots, but he had not looked at her like the others. He had not looked through her. A few days later, her small supply of cornmeal ran out. She had worked off most of the mending debt, but Holloway was still tight. "I need a sack of flour, Mr. Holloway, and some beans." He tallied the imaginary cost. "That will be $4. Clara." I only have 2. The laundry money. Please, Mr. Holloway, I'll clean the windows." Holloway rubbed his chin. "I don't know. Clara, credit is a risk." He looked at her, the smile returning. "A young woman like you, maybe we could arrange a different sort of payment. For the whole debt." She felt the blood drain from her face. "No," she whispered. "Just the beans, then," he said, pushing the flour sack away. She took the beans, her hands trembling, and fled the store, the shame burning hotter than the saloon's filth. Elijah had been in the back, near the stove, buying horseshoe nails. He had seen her face when Holloway spoke. He had seen her leave, her back straight, her head high, carrying only the small bag of beans. He waited until she was gone. He walked to the counter, put the nails down, and then pointed to the 20-pound sack of flour she had left behind. "I'll take that, and a sack of beans, the large one." He paid in cash. He carried the heavy sacks out. He didn't go to the ranch. He took the long way around, avoiding the main street, to her cabin. He knew where it was. Everyone knew. He set the sacks on her porch, balanced against the door. He did not knock. He did not leave a note. He turned and walked away, his limp a steady, quiet rhythm in the dusk. When Clara woke the next morning, opening the door to the pale, cold light, she saw them. Her first thought was fury. It was a trick. It was Sully, or Boone, a payment for something they expected to take, a way to tell the whole town she was accepting gifts. She was ready to drag the sacks all the way back to Holloway's and throw them at his feet. But she stopped. She touched the rough burlap of the flour sack. It was solid. It was real. There was no boastful ribbon, no smirking note. It was silent. She thought of the men, their loud laughs, their forward eyes. This was not their way. This was quiet. Then she remembered the man at the store, the gray eyes that had not judged her, She looked around the empty yard. There was no one, just the wind, worrying the tall, dead grass. She pulled the heavy sacks inside, her breath catching. She didn't understand it. She was wary of it. A gift with no name was dangerous, but as she set the flower on the shelf, her hand brushed the sack, and despite the cold, despite the fear, she felt a strange, unwelcome warmth. She leaned her forehead against the rough cabin wall. She was so very tired, but for the first time in weeks, she knew what she would eat for supper. That night, she sat by the fire, a small biscuit, made from the new flour, in her hand. She thought about her life. She tried to conjure her mother's face. All she had was a name, Anne, and the story of her death. Died in this very room, in childbirth. A ghost. She thought of Silas. He was a shadow, smelling of whiskey and axle grease. He had taught her to patch a roof, to set a rabbit snare, and to keep her own counsel. He was not unkind, just absent, even when he was sitting right across from her. He had been distant, but he had been there. Now, there was no one. The silence of the cabin pressed in, as heavy as the debts. The world was full of men like Holloway and Rafferty, and men like Sully, who saw her as a game. They were all waiting for her to break. But the flower was real. Someone had seen she was hungry. Someone had acted, not with noise, but with simple, quiet fact. Clara took a bite of the biscuit. It was plain, just flour and water and salt, but it tasted like survival. She was alone. Yes, but she was not broken. Not yet. The flower from the unknown benefactor lasted, but her peace did not. The men from the Circle K and Cross K ranches were in town often, their pay heavy in their pockets, and the wager was a fire that needed fuel. Sully, having failed to get more than a cold stare, was now the butt of the jokes. A new contender pushed his way forward. His name was Miles Carver. He was a handsome man, with a quick smile and dark, restless eyes. Where Sully was loud and crude, Miles was smooth. He fancied himself a charmer. He found Clara as she was leaving the saloon, her morning's work done. She was carrying her small, empty pail, her knuckles red from the lye water. "Morning, Miss Clara," Miles said, stepping off the boardwalk to block her path. He held his hat over his heart, a mockery of respect. "Mr. Carver," she said, her voice flat. She tried to step around him. He moved with her. "That's a hard job for a lady, scrubbing floors." "It's an honest one." It is. He smiled, and it didn't touch his eyes. "But a woman like you shouldn't be on your knees in a saloon. You should be wearing pretty things." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a spool of ribbon. It was bright silk, the color of a painted apple. "For your hair. I saw it in Holloway's. Thought of you." He held it out. The other cowboys, Sully among them, were watching from across the street, lounging on the rail, smirking. Clara looked at the ribbon. She looked at his smiling, confident face. She saw the audience. She knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was part of the game. "I don't accept gifts," she said. "It's just a ribbon, darling, a small token. No need to be shy." "I am not shy. I am declining." Her voice was like ice. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She pushed past him. Miles's smile faltered. He was not used to being refused. He grabbed her arm. It was not violent, but it was firm, a grip of possession. "Now hold on," he said, his voice losing its smooth edge. "I'm just trying to be friendly." Clara stopped. She did not pull away. She slowly turned and looked at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at his face. She said nothing. Her silence was more powerful than a scream. It was cold, deep, and full of contempt. She did not look afraid. She looked insulted. He let her go, his own face flushing. "Have it your way. Then he spat. He threw the red ribbon into the dirt at her feet. Clara looked down at the silk, now stained with dust. She met his eyes one last time, then turned and walked away, her back straight, never looking back. Across the street, the Cowboys howled with laughter. Miles Carver, the charmer, had been dismissed like a child. That night, the Golden Nugget was thick with speculation. Miles, his pride stinging, was angry. "She's stuck up," he declared, slamming his glass on the bar. "Thinks she's too good for us. She's a debtor, scrubbing floors, and she acts like a queen. She's playing hard to get." "Miles," Sully offered, glad the attention was off him. "She just wants you to try harder. Wants to drive the price up." "She ain't worth the trouble," another man grumbled. "She's worth the $45 in that jar," Miles said, his eyes narrowing. "And she's worth the trouble of breaking that pride." The wager grew uglier. It was no longer a simple, crude bet on who could woo her. It was now a challenge, a public contest to see who could humble her. The men grew bolder, their comments louder when she passed. They left small, insulting gifts on her porch: a dead prairie chicken, a cheap tintype of a saloon girl. They were trying to frighten her, to knock her off that high perch. The women of the town were no better. They saw the Cowboys circling, and they saw Clara's cold dismissal. They mistook her desperation for arrogance. "Stuck up," Mrs. Gable sniffed to her friends, watching Clara walk by. "Always was a quiet girl, but now she's just plain rude. You'd think with her father gone, she'd be grateful for a little neighborly attention." Clara felt the change. The world had become a wall of leering eyes and whispered insults. She kept her head down, did her work, and spoke to no one. Through it all, the silent help continued. She had been trying to mend the small fence that marked her property. It was falling down. The posts rotted. One top plank had split, leaving a sharp, dangerous edge. She had no proper tools, only her father's dull hatchet and some old rope. She hacked at the wood, frustrated and near tears, before giving up to go to her laundry work. When she returned at dusk, it was fixed. A new plank, smooth and straight, had been nailed in place. The post was braced with 2 new-cut lengths of pine. The work was not decorative. It was solid, strong, and done by someone who knew how to use a hammer. A few nights later, the wind turned. The cold that had lingered in the ground returned with a vengeance, a reminder that winter had not fully released its grip. Her woodpile, always small, dwindled to almost nothing. She began to ration, sitting in the cold cabin, wrapped in her blankets, to save the last few pieces for cooking. She woke the next morning to a new sound, a gentle thud on her porch. She opened the door. A neat stack of split firewood, mostly pine with some good hard oak, was piled by her door. It was not a mountain of wood. It was just enough for 2 or 3 days. She knew who it was, the gray-eyed man, Elijah. This was different from the flower. This was maintenance. This was observation. He was watching her fence fail, watching her woodpile shrink. The thought sent a strange shiver through her, a mix of fear and a warmth she refused to name. She was angry. This silent charity was another kind of claim. It made her a dependent, a thing to be pitied and cared for, like a stray dog. She decided to confront him. She would not be his secret project. She waited 2 days. She didn't see him. Then, on the 3rd day, she saw his gray gelding tied outside the livery. She found him in the shadows of the smithy, talking quietly with the blacksmith about a loose shoe. She waited until he was done. He stepped out into the muddy street, and she was there. "Mr. Gray." He stopped, turning. He was surprised to see her, but his face remained still. He just looked at her, waiting. He had those quiet, unnerving eyes. "I want to thank you for the wood," she said, her voice stiff. "And the fence. I've set aside $1.50. I believe that covers the cost of the plank and your time." She held out the coins, her laundry money. Elijah looked at her hand, at the small offering of silver, but he did not take it. "I don't want your money, ma'am," he said. "I pay my debts," she insisted, her voice rising. "I am not a charity case. Mr. Gray, I don't need a man to fix my fences or stock my woodpile." "I know you don't," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Then why? Why are you doing it?" She finally let her anger show. "Is this part of their game? Are you the one who plays quiet? The one who tries to earn trust while the others play the fool?" "What's your wager?" His face darkened. For a second, she saw something flash in his eyes, not anger, but a deep, old hurt. He stepped back, putting a little more space between them, as if she had struck him. "No, ma'am," he said, and his voice was flat. "It ain't a game." "Then why?" she demanded. "Why me?" He looked away, up the street, toward the bleak line of the hills. He seemed to be weighing his words, or deciding if he had any words at all. He pulled his hat brim a little lower. He looked back at her. He saw the pride in her face, the defiant tilt of her chin, but he also saw the exhaustion underneath, the dark circles under her eyes, the raw, chapped skin of her hands. He saw the thinness of her coat. "You looked cold," he said, simply. The words hung in the air between them. It was not an excuse. It was not a boast. It was not a claim. It was just a reason, a fact. Clara stared at him. She had been ready for a fight, for a confession, for a proposition. She was not ready for this. He was not trying to get anything. He was not trying to win her. He had simply seen a need, and met it. She lowered her hand, the coin suddenly heavy and foolish. "Oh," she said. It was all she could manage. "The wind's sharp," he said, nodding toward her cabin. "You should get inside." He tipped his hat, a short, respectful gesture, and limped past her toward his horse. That small, strange encounter broke something open. A slow, cautious friendship began. They did not meet often, but when they did, they spoke. He would be in town for supplies, and she would be walking between her jobs. He would fall into step beside her, his limp matching her weary pace. He was not a man for easy talk. The silence between them was as common as the words, but when he spoke, it was real. He told her about the war. He didn't talk about glory or battles. He talked about the mud and the noise and the long marches. "I was at Shiloh," he said one afternoon, looking at a hawk circling in the sky. "I was just a boy, 17. I saw things. I saw a man I knew, from my own town, just come apart. After that, nothing seems right. The world's tilted." He told her, haltingly, about a girl back in Ohio. "Her name was Sarah. We was promised, I guess, before I left. I was gone 4 years. When I got back, she was married, had a child. I can't blame her. 4 years is a long time. I was a ghost to her." His honesty was a stark, bracing thing. It invited her own. "No one's ever just talked to me," she admitted, her voice low. "Not like this." He looked at her. "Seems like folks round here do a lot of talking at you." "They do," she said. "Since I turned 16, it's been looks, men looking. My father, he kept them away, but he never talked to me either. Not really. I was just another chore to him. I think, keep her fed, keep her safe, keep her quiet." She kicked at a stone on the path. "Now they look at me and they see a thing, a wife, a whore, a prize, something to be had. They don't see me. They don't see Clara." "I see Clara," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. They stood there for a moment, two people defined by their scars, seeing the person in each other. The air had been heavy all day, a strange, greenish gray. A late spring storm was brewing, the kind that came down from the mountains with sudden, terrible violence. Elijah had been in town, and he had walked with her, carrying a repaired washboard from the blacksmith. They were halfway to her cabin when the sky opened. It was not rain. It was a wall of white, sleet, then snow, driven by a wind that screamed. Within a minute, they could not see the town behind them, or the hills in front. The temperature plummeted. "Get inside," Elijah shouted over the wind, pushing her toward the cabin door. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers already numb. They tumbled inside, slamming the door against the gale. The tiny cabin was plunged into a half-lit gloom, the wind shrieking through the cracks in the logs. "My God," Clara whispered, pulling her shawl tight. Elijah went to the window, rubbing the glass. "It's a blizzard. Came on fast. It'll settle in for the night." "You can't go back," she said. It was a statement of fact. "You can't make it to the ranch in this." "I'll be fine," he said, his old stubbornness. "You'll be dead," she shot back, her voice sharp with sudden fear. "The limp. You'll freeze before you get a mile. Don't be a fool. Mr. Gray, sit down." He looked at her. He looked at the howling white void outside the window. He knew she was right. To step out into that was suicide. He unbuttoned his heavy coat. The town'll talk." "Let them," she said, her voice weary. "They talk anyway." She lit the lamp, and the small cabin was filled with a warm, flickering glow. The space was tiny. Her cot was in one corner, the hearth, the table. With the two of them inside, it felt full, crowded. The storm howled. A living thing, a beast trying to get in. It made the silence inside the cabin thick. She made coffee, her hands shaking slightly. He took the cup, their fingers brushing. The jolt was sharp, like static. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, near the wood pile he had stacked. She sat on the edge of her cot. The tension was a living thing, as real as the storm. It was the tension of two deeply lonely people, trapped in a small, warm space, shielded from a world that wanted to hurt them. They talked, but it was strained. About the storm, about the price of feed. Small talk that failed to cover the large, unspoken things. Finally, they fell silent, just listening to the wind. "You should take the cot," he said into the darkness, hours later. "It's my cabin. You're the guest. I can sleep in the chair." "I'll sleep by the fire," he said, his voice firm. "I've slept on worse. A whole lot worse. You get some sleep." She lay down on the cot, pulling the wool blankets up to her chin. She did not undress. He settled by the hearth, his back to her, a long, dark shape in the firelight. She watched his silhouette. She tried to sleep, but she could not. She was too aware of him, his breathing, the way he shifted, the smell of cold air and horse and soap that had come in with him. She must have dozed because she woke with a start. Deep in the night. The cabin was cold. The wind was still screaming, a high, mournful sound. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Elijah was gone. A jolt of panic, sharp and cold, shot through her. Had he left? Had he been foolish enough to go out in that? Then she heard it. Through the howl of the wind, she heard a sound, a thud, thud, crack. She threw off the blankets and went to the small, frosted window. She scraped a clear spot with her fingernail. She could just see him. He was out by the wood pile, in the heart of the blizzard. He was using her father's axe. Snow caked his hair and shoulders. The wind tore at his coat. He was chopping more wood. She watched him, her breath fogging the glass. He was a shape of pure, stubborn strength. He was not just a guest, sitting by the fire. He was protecting the fire. He was tending to the warmth. He looked weathered and solemn and powerful. He came back in, his arms full of fresh split pine, a cloud of snow swirling in with him. He kicked the door shut. He did not see her. He knelt at the hearth, stacking the new wood, tending the embers, feeding the fire until it sparked and roared back to life. He stood up, brushing the snow from his shoulders, and turned. He saw her. She was standing by the cot. The blankets pooled at her feet, her hair unbound. They stared at each other in the sudden, bright light of the new fire. "You should be sleeping," he said. His voice was rough from the cold. "You'll catch your death," she whispered. Fire was low. He shrugged, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. The tension in the room was unbearable. It was all there, the cold, the warmth, the confessions, the silent gifts. "Why me, Elijah?" she asked, and her voice was a raw, aching thing. "Why do you care if I'm cold?" He stood very still. The firelight played on his face, highlighting the scars, the hard lines, the quiet gray of his eyes. "Because I know about that wager," he said, his voice soft but full of gravel. Clara's blood went cold. Wager? At the saloon, Miles Carver, Boone, the rest, a pot of money. He couldn't look at her. He looked at the fire. A pot for whoever wins you. She finally understood. It all crashed down on her. The smiles, the ribbon, the insults, the way they watched her. It was not just cruelty. It was a contest. She was a horse to be bet on, a deer to be hunted. He looked up, and his eyes were full of a deep, painful honesty. "I ain't part of their wager, Clara." He used her name, and it felt like a touch. "You ain't something to be won." His words were the first true respect she had ever been shown. It broke her. He saw the shock and pain in her face, the way her body trembled. He took a step toward her, then another. He wanted to fix it, to shield her. He was standing in front of her now, so close she could feel the cold coming off his clothes, and the heat from the fire behind him. He reached out, his hand rough, his fingers calloused. He slowly, gently brushed the hair back from her temple. It was the first kind touch she had felt in years. She leaned into it, just for a second, her eyes closing. A single tear escaped, hot on her cold cheek. He leaned down. She lifted her chin. Their breath mixed. They were a whisper away from each other. Then she flinched. She pulled back, as if she'd been burned. She scrambled back onto the cot, pulling the blanket up to her chin, her eyes wide with a new, sudden terror. It was not a fear of him. It was a fear of this, of needing, of owing someone. Not with money, but with herself, of letting the wall down, even for a second. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please." Elijah straightened up, as if she had slapped him. He held his hands up, palms out, a gesture of surrender. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick. "I'm sorry." He backed away, his limp more pronounced. He returned to the hearth, to the other side of the room, and sat down, his back to her. The fire crackled. The wind howled. The rest of the night passed in a long, aching, electric silence. The storm broke at dawn. The world outside was a blinding, pristine white. The wind was gone. The silence was absolute. Clara had not slept. Elijah got to his feet, his joints stiff. He looked exhausted. He put on his coat. "Storms broke," he said to the door. "I'll be going." "Elijah." He stopped, his hand on the latch. "Thank you," she said, "for the wood." He nodded, not turning. "Ma'am." He opened the door. The new, clean light flooded the cabin. He stepped out and limped away across the unbroken snow. Clara stood in the doorway, watching him go, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She was safe from the storm, but she felt, for the first time, completely and utterly terrified. Miles Carver did not take public humiliation well. His rejection at Clara's hands, followed by the hoots of laughter from the other cowboys, had turned his charm into a bitter, festering poison. He wanted two things, the money in the wager jar, and to see Clara broken. The blizzard gave him his opportunity. A ranch hand, riding back late from a card game, had seen a light in Clara's cabin in the deep of the night. He had seen Elijah's gray gelding, huddled against the lean-to. By morning, the whole bunkhouse knew that Elijah Gray had spent the night, trapped by the storm, at the cabin of the stuck-up girl. When the story reached the saloon, Miles seized it and twisted it. Trapped by the storm, Miles laughed, buying a round for the table. That's what he told you. The old cripple was just keeping her warm after I'd already left. The men at the table stared, their glasses halfway to their mouths. You? Sully said, his eyes wide. You're saying you won? Miles leaned back, hooking his thumbs in his belt. He put on a show of false modesty. A gentleman doesn't rightly tell all his secrets, but let's just say she ain't as cold as she pretends. Not once you get her door unlocked. He winked. She was just playing hard to get. Like I said, drove the price up. I just happened to be there before the storm hit. Gray. He just found my leavings. It was a vile, cowardly lie, but it was the story the men wanted to hear. It proved their worldview. It proved she was, after all, just a prize, and her pride was a fake. It proved that any woman, no matter how respectable, was attainable with the right pressure. He's lying, one of the younger hands whispered. Don't matter, Sully said, grinning. It's a hell of a story, and no one can prove him wrong. She ain't gonna talk. And Gray? He's too quiet to say different. Miles slammed his hand on the bar. Rafferty, the jar! I believe it's mine! Rafferty, who had watched Clara scrub his floors and had heard the desperation in her voice, knew it was likely a lie. He also knew Miles was a mean drunk, and the pot was just a pot. He shrugged, took the jar from the shelf, and slid the $45 in coins across the bar. Congratulations, Miles, you're a persuasive man. The rumor spread through the town like a prairie fire. It ran through the saloon, the livery, the smithy. It was whispered over fence posts and in the post office. By noon, the men believed it because they envied Miles, and the women believed it because they despised Clara. Told you, Mrs. Gable said over a bag of sugar at Holloway's store. She was playing high and mighty, but she's no better than the girls at the Nugget, just cheaper. And with Miles Carver, her friend whispered back, a thrill of scandal in her voice. He's a handsome one, but rough. To think all that time she was putting on airs. Clara knew nothing. The day after the storm, she had stayed inside, shaken by the night, by the near kiss, by Elijah's confession. The firewood he had cut kept her warm, but her mind was in turmoil. She felt a strange, terrifying crack in the wall she had built around herself. The next day, her supplies were low again. The flour was half gone. She took a few coins she had earned from the last load of laundry and, bracing herself, walked into town. The world had changed. As she walked down the main street, the men outside the saloon stopped talking. They just stared, but it was not the looks she had gotten used to. It was not the speculative, what-if gaze. It was a knowing, filthy, assessing leer. They looked at her like a piece of meat, already carved and served. She hurried past, her face burning, her stomach twisting. She pushed open the door to Holloway's. The store was warm, and 3 women, including Mrs. Gable, were clustered by the counter. Mr. Holloway was behind it. They all stopped talking when she entered. Mr. Holloway, Clara said, her voice small. I need a sack of cornmeal. Holloway's usual, oily smile was gone. It was replaced by a broad, familiar grin, as if they now shared a dirty secret. Cornmeal, is it? He said, his voice loud enough for the women to hear. Well, I suppose a girl's got to keep her strength up. All that company she's been keeping. The women tittered. Mrs. Gable looked Clara up and down, her eyes full of scorn. I'm surprised you have to pay at all, dear Mrs., Gable said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Surely, Mr. Carver is providing for you now. Clara froze. Mr. Carver? The pieces slammed into place. The looks, the whispers, the wager Elijah had told her about. Miles. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, the blood draining from her face. "Oh, come now," Holloway said, leaning on the counter. "The whole town knows. Miles won the bet. He's been bragging on it for 2 days. No need to be coy with us." "Clara." They thought Miles. She saw the scene. Miles, telling his story. The men laughing, the jar of coins. They thought she had with him, that she was a whore. She could not breathe. The store seemed to tilt, the faces of the women, sneering, victorious, blurred before her. "No," she said, but it was just a breath of air. It's a lie." "Of course it is. Dear Mrs. Gable said, patting her friend's arm. "They always say that. Come along. Ladies, the air in here has suddenly turned cheap." The women swept past her, holding their skirts aside as if to avoid touching her. Clara was left alone, standing in the middle of the floor, the object of Holloway's leering pity. "He's a liar," she said, her voice finally breaking, tears of rage and humiliation welling in her eyes. "He's a filthy liar." "Now, Clara," Holloway said, raising his hands. "It's no business of mine. You want the cornmeal or not?" She turned and fled. She ran from the store, down the boardwalk, past the staring, smirking men. She ran until her lungs burned, until she was out of the town, on the cold track to her cabin, the sound of their whispers chasing her all the way. Elijah was at the ranch, reshoeing his gelding. He had avoided town. He didn't want to see her. He was ashamed of that moment by the fire, of that near kiss. He felt he had betrayed her trust, become just like the others, pushing, wanting. One of the younger hands, Jesse, came into the stable. He looked uneasy. "Heard the news, Elijah?" Jesse asked, not meeting his eyes. "What news?" Elijah said, not looking up from the hoof. "About Miles. He won the wager." Elijah's hands went still. The heavy rasp dropped from his grip, clattering on the packed earth. "What?" "He's been telling everyone that he was with her, Clara, that he won." Elijah stood up slowly. The ache in his side, from the old bullet, flared. "When?" "Says it was the night before the storm," Jesse said, shuffling. "He collected the pot, $45. He's over at the Nugget, buying rounds, telling the whole story." Elijah's face was a mask, carved from stone. He said nothing. He walked past Jesse, out of the stable. "Elijah, where you going? Mister, Harding needs that fence line checked." Elijah didn't look back. He strode to the bunkhouse, pulled on his heavy coat. He did not take his gun. He didn't need it. He walked, his limp more pronounced, his pace fast, the 3 miles into town. The Golden Nugget was loud, even for a Tuesday. Miles was at the bar, his back to the door, a crowd of men around him, hanging on his words. He was embellishing the story, adding details, painting a picture of Clara as a desperate, hungry woman. And she said, "Miles, I'm so cold," he was saying, as the men laughed. And I said, "Darlin', I'm here to warm you right up." The batwing doors swung open. The saloon went silent. Elijah stood in the doorway. He was just a shape against the bright, cold light. Then he stepped in. His face was calm, but his gray eyes were flat, the color of a winter lake. He walked through the room. Men pulled their chairs back, clearing a path. Miles heard the silence and turned, his grin still on his face. "Well, well, if it ain't the man who kept her bed warm after... Come to congratulate me. Gray?" Elijah stopped 3 feet from him. He did not look at the other men. He did not look at Rafferty. He looked at Miles. "You're a liar," Elijah said. His voice was low, but it carried in the dead silent room. Miles's grin faded. "What'd you call me?" "You're a liar. You never touched her. You never spoke to her. You're a coward." telling tales on a woman who won't be defended. Miles's face flushed. He was bigger than Elijah. He wasn't hampered by a limp. He was full of whiskey and pride. "You're calling me a coward? Me, you're the one who—" Elijah hit him. It was not a barroom swing. It was a short, brutal punch to the gut. The air exploded from Miles's lungs in a gasp. Before he could double over, Elijah hit him in the jaw, a crack of bone on bone that sent him staggering back against the bar. Miles lunged, roaring, and Elijah met him. It was not a fight. It was a dismantling. Elijah was driven by a rage so cold it was almost silent. He was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for the woman who had looked at him with terror when he'd almost kissed her. He was fighting for the woman who scrubbed floors to pay her father's debts. He was fighting for the girl who had been called a whore in front of the whole town. He took a punch to the cheek that split the skin, and he didn't even blink. He backed Miles into a table, flipping it over. They went down. Elijah was on top. He hit Miles in the face. Once, twice. He grabbed him by the shirt and hit him again. Miles clawed at him, but it was weak. Elijah's face was a mask of terrible fury. He raised his fist again, and in that second, he remembered another man, another card game, the weight of a body falling, the guilt of killing a man. He stopped. His fist was raised, trembling, an inch from Miles's bloody, broken face. Miles was whimpering, no longer a man, just a terrified, beaten animal. Elijah stared at his own hand. Then he looked at the blood. He let go. He stood up, his breath coming in harsh, tearing gasps. The saloon was utterly still. The men looked at him with a new kind of fear. He looked at Miles, crumpled on the floorboards, spitting blood and a tooth. He looked at the spilled coins that had fallen from Miles's pocket. He limped to the bar, pulled a $20 bill from his own thin roll, most of his pay. He threw it on the bar. "For the table," he said to Rafferty. Then he turned and walked out of the saloon, leaving a dead silence behind him. Mr. Harding, the owner of the Cross K, was waiting for him when he got back to the ranch. Harding was a hard man, but fair. He did not look pleased. "He's not dead, which is the only reason you're not in jail," Harding said, not inviting Elijah to sit. "Miles Carver is pressing assault charges with the sheriff. I've spent the last hour convincing him to settle for your pay, and for you to be reassigned." Elijah said nothing. He just waited. "You're a good hand. Gray, one of the best. You're quiet. You do your work. But I can't have this. I can't have my men starting feuds and half-killing townsfolk over a saloon wager and some girl." "She's not some girl," Elijah said, his voice flat. "She is to me," Harding said, his voice sharp. "She's trouble, and you're now part of that trouble. I'm sending you up to the North Camp. You'll check the fence lines on the border. It's a month's work, maybe 2. Alone, stay away from town, stay away from her. When you get back, this will be forgotten. If you don't, if I see you in that town again, you're fired. You understand me?" "I understand," Elijah said. "Good. Be gone by morning." Elijah turned and left. He went to the bunkhouse, gathered his meager gear. He did not pack for the North Camp. He walked back to town. He found Clara in her cabin. The door was barred. He had to knock for a full minute before she opened it. Just a crack. When she saw him, his bruised face, the cut on his cheek, his split knuckles, she let him in. The cabin was cold. The fire was dead. She had been sitting on the cot, a small bundle of her mother's clothes beside her. She had been crying. "He told you," she whispered, seeing his face. "He didn't have to," Elijah said. "I heard the talk. I saw him." "Oh, God," she said, her hands flying to her mouth. "You fought him. Elijah, no." "He's a liar," Elijah said. "I made him admit it." "You made him what?" "I hit him at the saloon. I hit him. He won't be telling that story again. Clara stared at him in horror. You hit him? In front of everyone? Elijah, what have you done? They'll arrest you. You'll lose your job. I don't care about the job. You have to care, she cried, her terror turning to a desperate anger. It's all you have. It's all I have. My work, my reputation. It's all I have, and it's gone. And now you've ruined yourself. For me. It's not ruined. It is, she yelled, pounding a small fist on the table. Don't you understand? You can't fight for me. It doesn't make it better. It just proves them right. They'll say you're fighting over your property. They'll say, oh God, they'll say I'm your whore now. It's not better. Elijah, it's worse. She sank onto the chair, her body shaking with sobs. You have to go. You have to leave me alone. It's the only way. Please, just go. He stood there, watching her break. His own anger rose, a hot, protective fury. No. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. I won't let them shame you, he said, his voice a raw growl. I don't care about Harding's job. I don't care about this town. I won't stand by and let them break you. Why? She demanded, her voice a shredded whisper. Why do you care? It's not your fight. I'm nothing to you. He crossed the small room in 2 strides, his limp forgotten. He grabbed her by the shoulders, pulling her to her feet. He was shaking. Nothing. You think you're nothing? Why do you care? She screamed at him, her hands pushing against his chest. Because I want you, he yelled, the words torn from him, raw and unguarded. The confession hung in the cold, dead air. Clara froze, her hand stilled on his chest. Elijah's face was a mask of pain and desperation. He saw her shock, and his grip softened. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. But not like that, he said, his thumbs brushing her collarbone. Not the way they do. Not as a prize. He struggled for the words. I see you, Clara. I see you working and hurting. I see you standing up when they all try to push you down. I want you. She stared at him, at the raw, brutal, terrified honesty in his eyes. He had not come to claim her. He had not come to possess her. He had come to defend her, and in doing so, had confessed something he had never intended. This was not the violation she had feared her whole life. This was respect. This was a man seeing her, the person, and wanting her, not as a conquest, but as an equal. The crack in her wall shattered. She reached up, her hands still shaking. She grabbed the front of his shirt, bunching the rough cotton in her fists. She pulled him down. She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate and angry and full of all the fear and loneliness and pain of the last few weeks. It was a kiss that said, I am still here. I am still alive. He froze for a second, shocked. Then he kissed her back. His arms went around her, pulling her tight against him, lifting her off her feet. His mouth was hard, demanding, but not cruel. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving for years. It was rough-edged and emotional. They stumbled, a frantic tangle of limbs, toward the cot. It was not gentle, it was not sweet. It was 2 people, broken and alone, grasping for warmth in a cold, hostile world. It was survival. They fell onto the cot, wool blankets scratching, the old ropes creaking. He was heavy on top of her, but she did not feel trapped. She felt anchored. She met his hunger with her own, a desperate, aching need to be held, to be seen, to be chosen. The oil lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the log walls as they found a rough, frantic solace in each other's arms. Later, they lay tangled, the room silent, the air cold again. He had pulled the heavy blankets over them. She was nestled against his side, her head on his chest, her hand resting over the puckered scar on his ribs. His arm was heavy around her. The silence was new. It was not empty, it was full. I killed a man. he whispered into the darkness. "Years ago, a card game. He called me a cheat. He pulled a knife. I had a gun. I was too fast. I never meant—" "I see his face. Still." She held him tighter. "I never thought," he continued, his voice thick. "I never thought I deserved to be touched. Not like this. Not by someone good." "I'm not good, Elijah," she whispered against his skin. "I'm just tired." "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said. She was quiet for a long time. "I've never chosen," she said, her voice small. "My whole life. Men have tried to take, or they've ignored me. No one has ever just seen me and then asked." "I didn't ask," he said, his voice rough with guilt. "You did," she said, lifting her head to look at him in the gloom. "You asked, right before I kissed you. You told me you wanted me." He kissed her hair, his hand stroking her back. They whispered confessions under the wool blankets, in the flickering oil light, until the gray, cold light of dawn began to seep through the window. Morning brought fear. The light exposed everything, the squalor of the cabin, the bruises on his face, the reality of what they had done. Clara sat up, pulling the blanket around her. The cold was sharp. "This can't last," she said, her voice flat, all the fight gone. "Harding, he'll fire you. The town, they'll run you out. And me. I'll be what you said. Your whore." She looked at him, her eyes full of a new, dull despair. "It's not better. We just gave them more bullets." Elijah sat up, his bare torso exposed to the cold. He was not ashamed. He looked at her, his gray eyes steady, the light catching the silver in his hair. He reached out and took her hand. "Let them," he said. She looked at him, confused. "Let them talk," he said, his voice quiet, but full of a new, hard strength. "Let Harding fire me. Let the town try. I'm not leaving you. I told you. I'll stand by you, whatever happens." She stared at him. He meant it. He was not afraid. Or if he was standing anyway. "Elijah," she whispered, her fear warring with a strange, new hope. "We'll face them," he said, "together." The promise made in the dark. Cold cabin felt like a defiance, but morning light brought the world crashing back in. Elijah was still sitting at her table, his bruised face stark in the gray dawn. When the heavy knock came at the door, it was not a neighbor. It was the sound of authority. Clara froze, her hand still holding the tin coffee pot. Elijah looked at the door, and his face settled into a mask of grim resignation. He had been expecting this. He stood up, favoring his bad leg. "Stay back," he said quietly. He opened the door. Sheriff Blevins stood on the porch, his hand resting on his gun belt. Beside him stood a younger, nervous deputy. "Elijah Gray," Blevins said, though he knew the man by sight. "Sheriff." "I'm placing you under arrest, on the charge of assault, with intent to do grievous harm, against Miles Carver." Clara made a small, strangled sound. Elijah just nodded. He stepped onto the porch, his hands slightly raised. "No need for trouble, Sheriff." "Glad to hear it," Blevins said, his eyes flat and uninterested. He glanced past Elijah, into the cabin, and saw Clara. He saw the rumpled cot. His expression flickered with a mix of distaste and confirmation. The town was right. "Turn around," Blevins said. "That necessary?" Elijah asked, his voice low. "It is." Blevins pulled a set of heavy iron shackles from his belt. "No!" Clara cried, rushing to the doorway. "You can't! It was a fair fight!" "Ma'am," Blevins said, not looking at her. "You best stay out of this, deputy. Secure his hands." The deputy, fumbling, locked the irons around Elijah's wrists. The cold, metallic clink was the loudest sound Clara had ever heard. It was the sound of total, abject humiliation. They had not just arrested him, they had branded him.
"You don't understand,"
Clara pleaded, following them as they pulled Elijah toward the muddy street.
"Miles lied. He slandered me."
Blevins didn't stop. "Ma'am, slander is a matter for the courts, not for a man's fists. What Mr. Gray did, he did in front of a dozen men. He damn near killed him. That's a matter for a cell." They began the walk to town. It was the longest walk of Clara's life. Elijah was forced to walk in front. His hands bound, Clara followed a few paces behind, like a mourner, or she knew what they thought like his whore. The town woke up to watch. Mr. Holloway came to the door of his store, drying his hands on his apron, his face a mask of smug vindication. Mrs. Gable, sweeping her porch, stopped and stared. Her mouth a thin, hard line of judgment. The few cowboys lingering outside the livery whistled, low and cruel. Elijah kept his eyes forward. His back was straight, but Clara could see the muscles in his jaw working. He was in a cage of his own quiet fury. He was humiliated, not by the arrest, but by the irons, by the spectacle. They reached the sheriff's office, a squat log building with one barred window. Blevins shoved Elijah inside, into a small, dark cell at the back. He slammed the grated door. Clara stood in the doorway of the office, trembling, her fists clenched.
"Sheriff, please,"
she said, her voice shaking. "He's not a criminal. You have to listen to me." Blevins sat down at his desk, which was covered in dusty papers. He sighed, a long, tired sound. "Miss Clara, there is nothing to listen to. I have a victim, Mr. Carver, who is currently spitting up blood and teeth. I have Mr. Gray, who administered the beating. It's an open and shut case. The circuit judge, Judge Reed, will be here Friday. He'll hear the case and sentence him. Now, I suggest you go home." "It's not open and shut. Miles is the one who should be in jail." "For what? Hurt feelings? Calling you a name?" Blevins looked at her, his patience gone. "Ma'am, the law doesn't care about a saloon bet. It doesn't care about your reputation. It cares about a half-dead man in the doc's office. Now get on out of here." Clara looked at the sheriff, at his bored, indifferent face. He was the town. He was the apathy, the judgment, the refusal to see. She looked back at Elijah, who was standing in the shadows of the cell, his hands bound, his face unreadable. She felt a cold, hard knot form in her stomach. The fear was burning away, replaced by a desperate, sharp rage. She had nothing left to lose. Her reputation was already ashes.
"Sheriff Blevins,"
she said, her voice suddenly cold and clear. He looked up, surprised by the change in her tone. "If you don't let me speak to the judge, if you let this go to trial as a simple assault, I will stand on the steps of that saloon, and I will tell every person in this town, including the judge, exactly what Miles Carver did to me." Blevins leaned back, his chair creaking. "We've been over this. He slandered you."
"No," Clara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't understand. He didn't just lie about me. He lied to cover what he did."
Blevins frowned.
"What he did?" "He attacked me,"
she said, the words tasting like poison.
"Before the wager, before any of it, he attacked me, and I will tell the judge."
The sheriff stared at her. He saw the look in her eyes. This was not a bluff. This was not a woman's hysterics. This was the truth. And it was ugly. And it was about to make his life very, very complicated. "Judge Reed," he said slowly. "Ain't gonna like that."
"No,"
Clara said. "He won't." She turned and walked out, leaving the sheriff to stare at his dusty desk, a deep scowl on his face. She spent the next 2 days in a living hell. She scrubbed floors at the saloon, the scene of the wager and the fight, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the brush. Rafferty said nothing, just watched her with a new, wary expression. She mended shirts at Holloway's, the silence of the back room screaming at her. She did not go near the jail again. She didn't sleep. She sat in her cold cabin, and she remembered. It had been weeks ago, before Elijah had started leaving the wood, before the flower. She had just finished scrubbing the saloon floor. It was late, past midnight, the moon a sliver. She had been walking home, her pail heavy. He had stepped out of the alley between the saloon and the smithy. Miles. He was drunk. "Well, look at that," he'd slurred, blocking her path. The little ice queen, all alone.
"Mr. Carver,"
she'd said, trying to step around him. He had grabbed her. His hand was like a vice on her arm, spilling her bucket of dirty water. "Where you going in such a hurry? Too good to talk to me?"
"Let me go,"
she'd said, her voice tight with panic. "I just want to talk," he'd said, his whiskey breath hot on her face. "And maybe a kiss. You're too proud. Clara, someone ought to teach you." He had shoved her, hard, back against the rough log wall of the saloon. Her head hit the wood. She saw stars. He pressed his body against her, his hand fumbling at the collar of her dress. "Just one," he'd panted, his mouth searching for hers. Terror, cold and absolute, had flooded her. This was it. This was the thing her father had warned her about, the thing she had seen in the eyes of men her whole life. She didn't scream. She fought. She brought her knee up, hard, into his groin. He had grunted, his grip loosening just enough. As he doubled over, she raked her fingernails down the side of his face, drawing blood. He had bellowed, a sound of rage and pain, and staggered back, clutching himself. "You crazy bitch!" She hadn't waited. She ran. She ran all the way to her cabin, bolted the door, and sank to the floor, her entire body shaking. The next day, the wager had started. The rumor. He hadn't told anyone he'd been repulsed by the stuck-up girl. He told them he had conquered her. It was his revenge. It was his way of taking her when he had failed to take her. Now, she would have to say those words. Not to a dark alley, but to a room full of people. Friday came. Judge Reed arrived on the morning stage. He was an old man, with a spine of iron and eyes that looked like they had seen everything, and forgiven very little. He was not a man who cared for small-town politics. He cared for the law. Sheriff Blevins, true to his word, had spoken to him. The hearing was not to be a simple arraignment. It was a full hearing, and it would be held in the Golden Nugget Saloon, the only place large enough to hold the crowd. The entire town was there. The saloon was packed, the air thick with sweat and tension. Every seat was taken. Men stood 3 deep at the bar. Mrs. Gable and her friends had taken a table near the front, their faces masks of grim, excited judgment. Holloway was there. Sully, Boone, and the rest of the Circle K boys were there. Sober for once. Miles Carver was there, sitting near the front, his face a swollen, purple and green mess. He looked smug. He was the victim. Judge Reed sat at a table at the front, where the piano usually was. "Bring in the prisoner," the judge said, his voice a dry rasp. Sheriff Blevins brought Elijah in. He was still in shackles. The chains rattled in the dead silent room. He was pale, his face set like granite. Blevins sat him in a chair. Elijah's eyes found Clara, who was standing alone against the back wall. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't," but it was too late. "Sheriff Blevins tells me this is not a simple matter of assault," Judge Reed began, looking over the crowd. "He tells me there are extenuating circumstances. Miss Clara, Silas's daughter. Please approach." Clara felt her legs turn to water. Every eye in the room was on her. She walked, each step in agony, to the front of the room. She stood before the judge, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Miss Clara," the judge said, his voice not unkind, "I am told you have a statement concerning the actions of Mr. Miles Carver, actions that, you claim, provoked this assault.
Is that correct?
She swallowed. Yes, sir. Please tell this court what happened.
She looked out at the faces, the leering, curious, hostile faces. She saw Mrs. Gable, watching her with a hungry look. She saw Holloway polishing his glasses. She saw Miles, his one good eye full of hate.
This was it, the shredding.
It was about 3 weeks ago, she began, her voice a reedy whisper. The judge leaned forward.
Speak up, child.
She took a breath. It was 3 weeks ago. I was finished scrubbing the floor. Here, it was late. She told the story. The room was so quiet. The only sound was her own shaking voice. She told them about Miles, waiting in the alley. She told them about the whiskey on his breath. She told them about him grabbing her, shoving her against the wall.
He put his hands on me,
she said, her voice breaking, but she pushed on.
He said he was going to teach me. He tried to force me.
A collective gasp went through the room. Miles leaped to his feet.
That's a lie, he roared. She's a whore. She's lying to save her man.
Silence, Judge Reed bellowed, slamming his gavel on the table. Mr. Carver, you will sit down, or I will have you gagged. Deputy, restrain him if he moves again. Miles sat, his face purple with rage, but he was silent.
Continue, Miss Clara,
the judge said, his eyes fixed on her.
I fought him,
she whispered, the tears now streaming down her face.
I hit him, and I scratched his face. He called me a name. He let me go, and I ran.
She stopped, trying to catch her breath. And then, the judge prompted. And then the next day he started the rumor, the wager. He told everyone that I had been with him. He lied. He did it for revenge. To ruin me, because I fought him off. She was sobbing now, but she stood straight.
Elijah, Mr. Gray, he found out. He heard the rumor, but he didn't know the rest. He just knew Miles was lying and shaming me, and he fought him. That's why. It wasn't just a fight. He did it because Miles attacked me first.
She finished. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy. Judge Reed stared at her for a long, long moment. Then he turned his gaze to Miles Carver. Mr. Carver, stand up. Miles stood, his whole body tense.
I see your face is badly damaged
by Mr. Gray, but you also seem to be wearing a bandage on the other side of your face, under the bruising. Miles's hand went to his cheek. Take it off, the judge said.
It's just a cut,
Miles stammered. Take it off. Miles slowly, his hands shaking, unwrapped the dirty bandage. There, underneath the new, purple bruises, were 4 long, parallel scabs, faded but undeniable, the marks of fingernails, dragged through flesh. The room saw Mrs. Gable put her hand to her chest. Holloway looked away. The Cowboys at the bar just stared. Judge Reed nodded, slowly. I see. He looked at Elijah, who had not moved, his face still a mask. Mr. Gray. The judge said, You took the law into your own hands. You did not come to the sheriff. You did not file a complaint. You took it upon yourself to administer justice with your fists. You are lucky, sir, that you did not kill this man. This territory does not look kindly on vigilantism. I ought to... He paused, letting the words hang.
I ought to send you to Laramie for 6 months.
Elijah met his gaze. He said nothing. However, the judge continued, his voice hardening, in my long career, I have seldom seen provocation of this magnitude, or of such a vile, cowardly nature. The actions of Mr. Carver are an offense to God and man. He turned his cold eyes back to Miles. And as for you, Mr. Carver, if this county had a prosecutor worth his salt, I would have you arrested this instant for assault and battery. As it is, I find your testimony, and your very presence, to be entirely without merit." He raised his gavel. "The charges against Elijah Gray are dismissed. Sheriff, remove those shackles. Mr. Carver, I strongly suggest you ride out of this town by sundown. Your presence is an offense to its decent folk." He slammed the gavel. "This hearing is closed." The room exploded. Men started talking all at once. Sheriff Blevins, his face grim, walked over and unlocked Elijah's irons. The clink was quiet this time. Elijah stood, rubbing his wrists. He looked at Clara. She was still standing there, shaking, empty. He walked to her, pushing through the crowd. He took her arm. He said nothing. They walked out of the saloon, together. They walked back to the cabin. The town watched them go. The looks were different now. The scorn was gone, replaced by a stunned, uneasy silence. There was suspicion. They had seen the ugliness under their town. There was pity for her, and from some, from the young Jesse, from a few of the older ranchers, there was a new, silent admiration. They reached the cabin. Clara pushed the door open. The silence inside was thick, heavy. Elijah walked to the small window, his back to her. He stood there, rubbing his wrists. The marks from the irons were red and raw. He was free, but he was humiliated. He had been paraded like an animal. He had been shackled, and he had not saved himself. He had not won. He had been saved. By her shame, by her willingness to tear herself open in front of the world. He felt weak, indebted. It was a feeling he despised. Clara watched him. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the shame in his posture. She had won. She had saved him, but she felt filthy. She felt as if every person in that room had put their hands on her. She had won, but she had lost everything. She sank onto the small stool by the cold hearth, and her body began to shake. A low, tearing sound came from her throat. "They'll never stop," she whispered, the tears flooding her eyes, hot and bitter. "It's not over. They'll just find another way. They'll always look at me. They'll always know." She put her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with a grief so profound it seemed to have no bottom. "They'll never stop. They'll never let us be." Elijah's shame vanished, burned away by the sound of her breaking. This was his fault, his fight, his inability to protect her. He turned from the window. He limped to her, his bad leg dragging. He knelt on the hard-packed earth floor, a painful, awkward movement. He put his arms around her, pulling her against his chest, holding her tight as she sobbed. He held her for a long time, rocking her, his own face a mask of pain. "You're right," he said at last, his voice a raw growl. "They won't. This town, it's poisoned. It's built on their judgment." She looked up, her face a mess of tears. "So what do? We can't live here." "So we leave," he said. Her sobs hitched. "Leave? Leave where? We have nothing. You have no job. I have nothing but debts and this." "I have a place," he said, his hands moving to cup her face, his rough thumbs wiping her tears. "I told you, up in the mountains, high up, a small cabin I built myself. When I was trapping, it's quiet, it's hard living, but it's honest. There's no one there, just trees and sky. I lived off the land for 2 years there. We can just go." She stared at him, at the desperate hope in his bruised face. "Just go?" "Just go," he said, his voice fierce. "We'll take what we need. We'll leave this cabin. We'll leave the debts. We'll leave them. We'll leave all of it. Tomorrow." The next day, there was a new purpose in the cabin. Clara moved with a quiet, grim efficiency. She packed what mattered, the heavy iron skillet, her mother's tin type, the only one she had, the wool blankets, her father's old hunting rifle. Elijah went to the livery. He drew his savings, $63. He saddled his gray gelding and packed his mule.
He went to the smaller general store, the one on the edge of town, and bought sacks of flour, beans, salt, and coffee. He bought ammunition. The town watched them. Holloway stood in his doorway, his arms crossed, his face sour. He was losing his debt, but he knew he could not stop them. The town's mood had turned against him, against Miles. Mrs. Gable watched from behind her lace curtains as Clara loaded the mule. She saw the rifle, the set of Clara's jaw. She felt a strange, unwelcome pang of admiration, quickly smothered by her own indignation. The two of them, Clara on the mule, Elijah on his horse, rode down the center of the main street. They did not look left or right. They did not stop. They rode past the saloon, past Holloway's, past the sheriff's office. They rode out of town, heading west, toward the high, cold, unforgiving peaks of the mountains, leaving the judgment and the noise and the shame behind them, a cloud of dust in their wake. They rode for 2 days, pushing west, climbing from the dusty, open plains into the hard rock country. The air grew thinner, cleaner. The wind no longer carried the scent of dust and manure, but of pine and cold stone. They left the world of men behind, climbing trails that were little more than game tracks, winding through canyons, up switchbacks, and over ridges that revealed a world of silent, jagged peaks. Clara rode the mule, her father's rifle resting across her lap. Elijah rode his gelding, his face set, his eyes constantly moving. He was checking the sky, the rocks, and, most of all, their back trail. They spoke little. The journey was too hard for words. It was a shared, grim purpose. But with every ridge they crossed, Clara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The town, the whispers, the leering faces of Holloway and Mrs. Gable. They all seemed to shrink, to become small and insignificant, part of a world that no longer mattered. On the third morning, Elijah reined in his horse. They were on a high plateau, a vast, wind-swept place of scrub and rock. He dismounted, limped to the edge of the cliff, and looked back the way they had come, far below, miles away. In the fold of the distant plains, he saw it, a small, rising plume of dust. It was not a wind devil. It was steady, it was moving fast, and it was following their trail. Clara had dismounted, her body stiff and sore. She came to stand beside him. "What is it?" "Trouble," he said, his voice flat. He pointed. 4 riders, pushing hard. Clara's heart seized. The air, which had seemed so clean, suddenly felt thin and cold. "Who?" "It's him," Elijah said. He did not need to say the name. Miles. "The judge is gone. He thinks he's the law now." "But they'll never find us up here." "Will they?" "They will," Elijah said, his face grim. "They'll follow our tracks. We can't outrun them, not with the mule. They're riding lighter." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a terrible, cold calm. "We have to stop them." He grabbed the reins of his horse and led it off the trail, up a narrow, barely visible track that cut between 2 massive pillars of red rock. "This way. I know a place." The track opened into a narrow pass, a bottleneck in the stone, barely 10 feet wide, with sheer walls on either side. It was a natural trap. "He'll have to come through here single file," Elijah said. He dismounted, pulled his rifle from its scabbard, and checked the load. He handed the reins of his horse to Clara. "Take the animals back," he ordered, his voice sharp, all the softness gone. "Around that bend. Get behind that high boulder. Stay there, and keep the mule quiet." Clara's hands were shaking. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to wait," he said. He handed her his heavy pistol. "You know how to use this?" "My father, he showed me." "Good. Don't use it. Not unless I go down. You just stay hidden. You understand?" "Elijah," she began, her voice a terrified whisper. "Clara, do as I say.
Now. She looked at his face, the bruised, hard face of a stranger. This was not the man who had bought her flour. This was the man who had survived Shiloh. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She took the pistol, the metal heavy and cold, and led the animals around the bend, disappearing behind a high pile of fallen rock. Elijah found his spot, a small alcove in the rock, 10 feet up, shielded from the entrance. With a clear line of sight, he lay on his belly, his rifle resting on a flat stone, and he waited. An hour passed. The only sound was the high, thin shriek of a hawk, circling in the blue. Then he heard them, the clatter of hooves on stone, the jingle of spurs, laughter, coarse and ugly. Miles Carver led the way. His face was a swollen, purple mask, his bravado fueled by whiskey and a burning, obsessive rage. Behind him rode Boone, his arm in a crude sling, but a pistol in his good hand, and Sully, who looked nervous, his eyes darting, and a fourth man, one Elijah didn't know, a hard-faced man with 2 gun belts, who looked like he was here for the money, not the cause. They rode into the pass, slowing their horses as the walls closed in. "He came this way," Miles called back, his voice echoing. "I see the mule's tracks. He's trapped." "Miles, maybe we should just take the horses," Sully said, his voice shaking. "We taught him a lesson." "Taught him a lesson?" Miles roared, his voice cracking. "He near killed me, and that bitch, she'll pay for what she said. We're dragging that runaway whore back, and she'll beg me to tell the town I was lying. Now, shut up and ride." He spurred his horse forward, right into the center of the pass. "That's far enough, Miles," Elijah's voice called out, seeming to come from the rocks themselves. The men froze. They looked around, their hands hovering over their guns. "Gray!" Miles shouted, his eyes wild, searching. "Show yourself. You're a coward, hiding in the rocks, just like you're a killer." "I am what I am," Elijah's voice replied, cold and steady. "And I'm telling you, for the last time, this ain't your business. Ride on, go back to town, or I will put you down." You and who else?" Miles sneered, but he was afraid. "Just me," Elijah said. The hard-faced man, Taggart, was not afraid. He had spotted the rifle barrel, high in the rocks. He drew his pistol in a blur. "He's up there." He fired. The bullet sparked off the rock, inches from Elijah's head. The pass exploded with sound. Elijah fired his rifle. The shot was deafening. Taggart was thrown from his saddle, a dark hole in his chest, his gun firing once more into the dirt. Boone screamed and fired wildly, his shots going high. Sully yelped, fell from his horse, and scrambled behind a rock, whimpering. "You son of a bitch!" Miles screamed, firing his pistol at the flash from Elijah's rifle. A bullet, blind with rage, found its mark. It tore through the thick muscle of Elijah's left shoulder, spinning him around, slamming him into the rock wall. He cried out, a sharp, ragged sound, and his rifle clattered onto the stone ledge. Behind the boulder, Clara heard it, that sound. It was not a sound of rage, it was pain. She screamed his name. "Elijah!" Miles heard her. A wild, triumphant grin split his swollen face. "She's here! She's here! He's hit! Boys, he's hit!" He spurred his horse forward, toward the bend. Clara's mind went white. She saw him, Miles, coming for her. She saw the rifle lying on the ledge. She saw Elijah, slumped against the rock, trying to reach for it with his good arm. She stepped out from behind the boulder. She was holding Elijah's heavy pistol, with both hands, the way her father had taught her. Miles reined in his horse, his grin fading to shock. "Clara!" "Stay back!" she screamed, her voice a raw, primal thing she did not recognize. "Stay back, or I swear to God I will kill you!" Miles stared at her. The terrified girl from the town was gone. This was a woman, her hair wild, her face streaked with tears and dirt, holding a .44 caliber pistol, and she was not bluffing. A shot echoed from the cliff above. Miles grunted, a look of surprise on his face. He looked down. A red stain was spreading on his shirt, high on his own shoulder. Elijah was standing on the ledge, his face as white as paper, his left arm hanging useless, but his pistol was in his right hand, smoking. "I won't miss again," Elijah gritted out, his voice a thread, as he raised the gun again. Boone, seeing Taggart dead and Miles hit, let out a terrified wail. "He's gonna kill us all!" He scrambled onto his horse, his broken arm flapping, and galloped back down the pass. Sully was already on his feet, running, not even stopping for his horse. Miles looked at the blood on his shirt. He looked at Clara, who was still aiming at him. He looked up at Elijah, a bloody, avenging angel on the cliff. The fight was gone. All the rage, all the whiskey, all the hate. It all drained out of him, leaving only a hollow, whimpering terror. He yanked his horse's head around, so hard the animal reared, and he fled. He galloped down the pass, chasing his men, leaving the dead man, the rifles, and the silence behind. Clara stood for a full second, the pistol still raised. Then it fell from her numb fingers. She scrambled up the rocks to the ledge. Elijah was slumped against the wall, his eyes closed, his face slick with sweat. His entire left side was soaked in blood. "Elijah! Oh, God, Elijah!" He opened his eyes. They were clouded with pain. "It's just the shoulder," he whispered, a grim echo of Miles's own wound. "He hit me." "It's all right," she said, her voice shaking, as she tore a long strip from her petticoat. "We're safe. They're gone." She pressed the cloth, hard, against the bleeding hole in his shoulder. He cried out, a thin, sharp sound, and his head lolled back. "Clara, we have to go, before they come back." "They're not coming back," she said, her voice fierce, trying to will her own strength into him. "They're cowards, and Taggart is dead." The finality of the word hung in the air. Elijah looked at the body, lying in the pass below. "I killed him." "You saved us," she said, tying the bandage as tight as she could. "Now, we have to save you. Can you ride?" "I can ride," he gritted. It took her nearly half an hour to get him down from the ledge and onto his horse. He was a dead weight, his consciousness flickering. She tied him to the saddle. Using the rope from the mule's pack, she retrieved his rifle and the pistols. She did not look at the dead man. She took the reins of his gelding and began to walk, pulling the horse, the mule, and the wounded man higher into the mountains. For 2 more hours, she climbed. Elijah was delirious, muttering about Shiloh, about the cold. She just kept walking, pulling, whispering to him. "Not far now. We're almost there. Just hold on." Finally, as the sun began to dip, painting the high peaks a bloody red, she found it, tucked into a hidden valley, sheltered by ancient pines, was a small, rough-hewn cabin. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She half carried, half dragged him inside, onto a narrow cot built into the wall. The cabin was one room, dusty, smelling of pine and old, cold smoke, but it was safe. Her body was moving, even as her mind was numb with shock. She found his matches. She built a fire in the stone hearth. She found the stream he had told her about, a trickle of ice-cold water, and filled her pot. She barred the door. She set the water to boil. She lit the one oil lamp. In the flickering light, she looked at him. He was pale, his breathing shallow. The bandage was already soaked. She took a deep breath. She pulled out the bottle of whiskey from his pack. She took his hunting knife. "Elijah," she said, shaking his good shoulder. "Elijah, wake up." He groaned, his eyes fluttering. "I have to clean it," she said, her voice shaking. "I have to. The bullet, it went through, but I have to clean it." He focused on her face. He nodded, once, Bite this, she said, folding a strip of clean cloth and pushing it into his mouth. She cut the bloody shirt away. The wound was a ragged, purpled mess. The entry, high on his shoulder, was small. The exit, under his shoulder blade, was a torn, brutal hole. God, she whispered. She took the whiskey. Hold on. She poured the raw, yellow liquid directly into the wound. Elijah's body arched off the cot. A strangled, inhuman sound was torn from his throat, muffled by the cloth. His eyes, wide with a pure, white-hot agony, were locked on her face. She did not flinch. She poured more, washing it, her hands shaking, but her purpose firm. I'm sorry, she whispered, as she worked, her own tears blurring her vision. She cleaned his blood. She saw the old, puckered scar on his ribs, a pale moon, and now this new, raw, angry star. She saw the pain he carried, written on his skin. When it was done, she bound him, back and front, with the last of her clean cloth. He was slick with sweat, trembling so hard the cot shook. He spat the cloth from his mouth, his breath coming in ragged, tearing gasps. Clara, he panted, his voice a thread. I'm here, she said, sinking to her knees beside the cot, her strength gone. She put her hands on his good shoulder, her head bowed. I'm here. He reached up, his good hand, his right hand, trembling, and found her. His fingers were cold, but they closed on her wrist. She looked up. His eyes were closed, but tears were seeping from the corners. Your touch, he whispered, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear it. Your hands, they hurt so bad. He took a ragged breath. But it feels like the first thing that's ever made me want to live. She broke, a sob, a sound of all the fear, all the horror, all the love was torn from her. She laid her head on his chest, on his good side, and cried, her hands clutching his shirt. He held onto her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, as if he, too, were drowning, and she was the only solid thing in the world. He was lost to fever for 2 days. She did not sleep. She sat in the one chair, her father's rifle across her lap, watching the door. She forced broth and water between his cracked lips. She changed his bandages, cleaning the wound with hot, salt-laden water. She watched him, and she watched the pass, a lone guardian at the top of the world. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. She had dozed in the chair, and a noise woke her. His eyes were open. They were clear. He was watching her. You stayed, he whispered. I told you I would, she said, her voice thick with exhaustion. That night, the cabin was quiet. The fire was warm. He was propped up against the log wall, his arm in a sling she had made. He had eaten a small bowl of broth. The color was returning to his face. Clara sat on the floor, near the fire, mending the shirt she had cut from him. The silence was deep, comfortable. I killed a man, Clara, he said, his voice quiet, heavy. She didn't stop her stitching. You saved our lives. He would have killed you. He would have taken me. It was him or us. I won't mourn him. He was quiet for a long time. You should have left me, he said at last. When I was hit, you could have taken the horse, gotten away. She stopped sewing. She put the shirt down. She turned and looked at him, his face half in shadow, half in firelight. I'm not running anymore. Elijah, she said. She moved from the fire and sat on the edge of the cot. She was careful not to jostle him. When we were in my cabin, she began, her voice soft. Back in the town, I was so scared. I was desperate. I felt like I had nowhere else to go. The whole world was burning down, and I fell into your arms. His face tightened. He looked away, at the fire. I know. No, she said, gently. She touched his good hand. You don't listen to me. He turned back, his gray eyes searching her face. I'm not desperate anymore, she said, her voice steady and clear. I'm not trapped. I'm not that girl. I could take that horse and that mule right now. I could ride down and just keep going. I could go to Oregon. I could start over. No one would find me. You should, he whispered, his voice rough. You deserve that. I'm a killer. Clara, I've got nothing. I've got this. He gestured to the small, rough cabin. I'm a broken man. I know what you are, she said, her voice fierce. I've seen all of you. You're the man who bought me flour when I was starving. You're the man who cut my wood when I was cold. You're the man who got shackled. For me. And you're the man who just bled for me. On that mountain. She leaned closer, her eyes holding his. I want to stay with you, Elijah. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose you. You. And this, she looked around the small, safe room. This hard life, I choose it. I choose you. He stared at her, his mouth slightly open. The hard, settled pain that lived in his eyes seemed to crack. A light, a vulnerable, flickering light, grew there. Clara, he said, and his voice was thick. He had to stop, to swallow. I told you, I never believed in God or anything good. Not after the war. Not after I lost Sarah. Not after that card game. He shook his head, his eyes bright. I never believed in redemption. I thought that was a story for preachers. I believed in surviving. I thought that's all I was, a man who survives and hurts people. He raised his good hand, his right hand, and touched her cheek. His skin was warm. Until you, he whispered, you standing in that store, with your pride, you fighting me about the wood, you kissing me, you saving my life, you, right now, choosing me. He let out a long, shaky breath. I think you are my redemption. Clara. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the frantic, desperate kiss of the cabin. It was not the hungry, fearful collision. It was slow. It was aching. It was tender. He tasted of fever and broth and salt. She was exquisitely careful of his shoulder, of his body. They made love. It was a slow, almost reverent act. It was weighted with everything they had survived. The passion was there, but it was a deep, slow-burning coal, not a raging fire. It was the passion of survival. It was the intimacy of absolute trust. It was the act of being chosen, freely, by the one person who had seen all the scars, all the ugliness, all the sin, and had decided to stay. It was two broken people, high at the top of the world, in a hidden, safe cabin, finally, putting the pieces of themselves together. After, they lay tangled in the narrow cot, her head on his good shoulder, the fire painting the log walls a warm, glowing red. He held her with his one good arm. I've never, she whispered into the warm skin of his neck. I've never felt safe in my whole life. Not for 1 second, until right now. He kissed her hair and held her tighter, his grip strong and sure. Outside, the wind howled, a thin, lonely sound, but it could not reach them. Elijah's shoulder healed slowly, but it healed. The wound was deep, a brutal tearing of muscle, but the cold, clean mountain air and Clara's constant care kept the fever from returning. In the small, hidden valley, they fell into a rhythm. She would hunt, setting snares for rabbits as her father had taught her, using the rifle to bring down a small deer. He, with his arm in a sling, would do what he could with one hand, mending the cabin, splitting kindling, his face tight with the pain and the frustration. They were a world away. The town, the wager, the humiliation. It all felt like a bad dream, a story that had happened to 2 other people. Here, there was only the wind in the pines, the hard, bright stars at night, and the shared, quiet work of survival. They were not just surviving. They were building. But the world below did not forget. They had been there for nearly 3 weeks when they saw the rider. It was a single horse, climbing the pass slowly, not with the urgency of a pursuit, but with the steady, labored pace of a messenger. Elijah stood, his hand going to the pistol at his belt. His shoulder was still stiff, but he could use the arm now. Clara came to stand beside him at the cabin's small window, the rifle in her hands. The rider was not Miles. It was not Sully. It was the young cowboy. Jesse. He saw them, and he raised his hand, palm open. "I'm alone," he called out, his voice thin in the high air. "I come in peace, from Judge Reed." Elijah and Clara looked at each other. The judge. The world was coming back. Elijah nodded. "Come on up, but slow." Jesse dismounted, his horse blowing hard. He looked at Elijah, at his arm in the sling, and at Clara, who looked harder, healthier, and more dangerous than he had ever seen her. "What is it, Jesse?" Elijah asked. "It's a mess, Elijah," Jesse said, twisting his hat in his hands. "The town, it's all torn apart. See, after you left, a posse rode out. Sheriff Blevins and Mr. Harding and some others. They found Taggart's body in the pass." Elijah nodded. "I put him there." "We figured," Jesse said, swallowing. "But that ain't all. They found Miles Carver about 5 miles down the trail. He'd bled out from the hole in his shoulder. His horse was just grazing nearby." Clara's hand, holding the rifle, trembled. She had not known. She had only seen him flee. 2 men. "So the town's divided." Jesse rushed on. "Harding he's furious. He says you're a mad dog killer, that you ambushed them. Holloway and Mrs. Gable, they're all saying you're a murderer, and that Miss Clara, well, that she's your accomplice, that she lured them up here." "And the others?" Clara asked, her voice cold. "That's the strange part," Jesse said. "Rafferty, at the saloon. He shut 'em all up. He said Miles got what he deserved, and Taggart was a hired gun who pulled first. He said you did what any man would do, and a lot of the other hands, they're quiet. They're afraid of you, Elijah, but they respect you. They respect both of you." "The judge," Elijah said. "You said Judge Reed." "Yes, he came back. As soon as he heard, Harding is demanding a trial. A murder trial. The judge he sent me. He said he knows you're not a man to run. He said he will be at the courthouse. In town. In 2 days. He said, tell Mr. Gray to come and finish this. Tell him to trust the law." Elijah looked at the high, blue sky. He looked at Clara, at the small, safe home they had started. He could stay here. They would never find him. They could run, go to Oregon, just as she had said. He turned and looked at Jesse. "Tell the judge we'll be there." "Elijah, no," Clara said, grabbing his good arm. "You can't. They'll hang you. This time they won't listen. 2 men are dead." "And 2 men are alive," he said, putting his hand over hers. "You and me. I won't run. Not from this. I killed Taggart, and my bullet killed Miles. I will stand for that." He looked at her, and his eyes were steady. "I'm not the man I was. I'm not that killer from the card game. This was different, and I'll tell him why." "Then I'm going with you," she said, her chin set. "No, Clara, you're safe here. This is my accounting." "It's our accounting," she said, her voice fierce. "It was me they were after. It was my name they ruined. It was me he attacked. They have to hear all of it, not just the bullets. They have to hear the rest, the part I was too ashamed to say." Jesse looked between the 2 of them, at the hard, unbreakable bond. "I'll tell him you're coming," he said, backing toward his horse. "Elijah, be careful. Harding has money. He's paying for a prosecutor." Elijah just nodded. They rode back into town 2 days later. It was harder this time. Elijah was still weak, his shoulder a constant, dull throb. Clara rode beside him, her back straight, her father's rifle in her scabbard. The town was silent. It was the silence of a held breath. They were not pariahs this time. They were not objects of scorn. They were something else, something dangerous, something tragic, something real. Mrs. Gable watched them pass from behind her curtain, but she said nothing. Holloway stood in his doorway, but he did not sneer. He just watched, his face pale. The hearing was in the small, clapboard courthouse this time. It was official. It was not a hearing. It was a trial. The room was packed. Judge Reed was at his bench, a thin, sharp-faced man in a suit. The prosecutor was at a table. Mr. Harding sat behind him. Elijah and Clara sat alone, on a bench at the front. He was not in shackles. The prosecutor was brutal. He painted a picture of a cold-blooded killer. "Elijah Gray," he thundered. "A man with a history of violence. A man who, by his own admission, has killed before." He was dismissed from his job. In a rage, he followed Miles Carver, a man who had already been his victim, and he ambushed him. He and this woman, they lured 4 men into a pass, and Elijah Gray executed them. He shot Taggart from a high, hidden perch, an assassin shot, and he shot Miles Carver, a wounded man, as he tried to flee. Harding testified. Sully and Boone testified, their stories full of fear, painting Elijah as a monster in the rocks. Then, the judge looked at Elijah. "Mr. Gray, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Elijah stood, his one arm in its sling. "I do, Your Honor." He spoke, his voice low and steady. He told the truth. "They followed us. They were coming for Miss Clara. Miles. He was yelling. He said he was going to drag her back. He called her a runaway whore. He said she'll pay for what she said." The prosecutor leaped up. "Objection! This is slander against the dead." "It's the truth," Elijah said, his voice quiet. "Taggart. He fired first. He was a hired gun. He shot at me. I shot back. I did kill him. I shot Miles, too, to stop him, to protect her. I didn't know he was dead until Jesse told us. I did what I had to. I would do it again." The room was silent. "A convenient story," the prosecutor sneered. "He claims he was protecting this woman, but we have all heard the testimony from the last hearing. We know the relationship between them. How do we know this wasn't a lover's quarrel? A jealous rage? He'd already beaten Miles half to death. This was just finishing the job." "That is not what happened," Clara's voice said, sharp and clear. She was standing. "Miss Clara," the judge said, "you are not on trial." "No, sir," she said, walking to the front. "I am not, but I am the reason this happened. And that man, that prosecutor, he's wrong, and I have proof of what Miles Carver was." "Clara, no," Elijah whispered, his face pale. "Don't." She ignored him. She looked at the judge, and her eyes were clear. "Your Honor, at the last hearing, I told you what Miles Carver tried to do to me. I was ashamed. I was not fully honest. I didn't tell you what he did." She unbuttoned the high collar of her dress. "He didn't just shove me," she said, her voice shaking, but loud. "He hit me." She pulled the collar aside. On her shoulder, faded but still sickeningly visible, was the yellow and purple stain of a large, brutal bruise, the shape of a man's fist. And here," she said, her hands fumbling with the buttons on her sleeve. She pushed the sleeve up, past her elbow. Her forearm was covered in dark, ugly blotches, the fading marks of a man's fingers, where he had gripped her, hard enough to break the skin. "I was too ashamed to show you," she cried, the tears finally coming. "I hid this, but this is the man who was chasing me. This is the man who rode into those mountains. He wasn't coming to talk. He was coming to finish what he started. She stood there, her bruises exposed, her dignity offered up, a sacrifice to the truth. Mrs. Gable, in the front row, let out a small, horrified gasp. Harding, the ranch owner, looked away, his face, for the first time, uncertain. The prosecutor was silent. Judge Reed looked at Clara for a full, long minute. He looked at her bruises. He looked at Elijah, standing with his arm in a sling. He looked at the hard, unforgiving faces of the men in his courtroom. "In my time," Judge Reed said, his voice low and heavy, "I have seen the law used as a weapon. I have seen it used to protect the powerful and to punish the weak. I am weary of it. This is not a simple case. 2 men are dead. That is a fact. Mr. Gray, you have killed again. That is also a fact. But this court, I am not blind. I see the evidence before me. I see the testimony of this woman. I see these bruises. I see a pattern of violence, of obsession, and of evil from Mr. Carver. I see a man, Taggart, who was, by all accounts, a hired gun, who fired first. What I see here is not murder. It is not an ambush." He looked at Elijah. "It is a tragedy, but it is also self-defense. It is the defense of a home. It is the defense of a life. It is the defense of this woman." He raised his gavel. "This court finds Elijah Gray not guilty. The deaths of Miles Carver and the man Taggart are ruled justifiable acts of self-defense." He slammed the gavel. "However," he said, as the room began to stir, "Mr. Gray, this town is not your home. You are a hard man, and you have brought a hard justice here. You are cleared. You are free. But I am warning you. Stay away from this town. Your presence here, it will only bring more trouble. Go back to your mountain, and do not come back." Elijah nodded. He walked to Clara, who was rebuttoning her dress, her hands shaking. He put his good arm around her. They walked out of the courthouse. No one spoke to them. No one touched them. They walked together, back to her father's cabin. They did not stay. Clara took one look at the small, cold room, the place of her shame, the place of her father's debts. "I'm not staying here," she said. "We have the mountains," he said. "We need a start," she said. She walked out of the cabin and down the street. She walked to Mr. Halloway's store. He was there, behind the counter, looking small. "Mr. Halloway," she said, her voice clear. "My father's debt, it's void. I'm selling the cabin, and the land, it's worth at least $200. Halloway looked at her. He saw the woman who had faced down a courtroom. He saw the woman who had changed the town. He just nodded. "I expect it is. Miss Clara, I can find a buyer, or buy it myself." "You have 1 hour," she said. She sold the cabin and the small plot of land to Halloway for $175. She took the money, and she walked to the livery. She paid for her mule. She walked to the other general store. She did not buy bullets. She did not buy beans. She bought 2 chickens, their legs tied. She bought a small bag of seed. She bought a new, sharp axe head and a box of nails. She bought a spool of thick wool yarn and knitting needles. They rode out of town for the last time. They did not look back. The final scenes, they are quiet. They are the scenes of a life being built. Not in a town, but in the wilderness. We see them, in that high valley. Elijah, his shoulder healed, his limp a part of him, is felling a tree. The thwack of the axe is a clean, sharp sound. He is adding a room to the cabin. We see Clara. She is not scrubbing floors. She is mending a fence. She is building a small coop. Her face is weathered. Her hands are strong. The 2 chickens are pecking in the dirt. We see her laughing. She is kneeling by the stream, pulling a fish from the water. She laughs, a full, clear sound, and throws it onto the bank. Elijah is watching her, and he is smiling. It is a slow, unused expression, but it is real. One evening, they are sitting by the fire. The cabin is larger now. It is a home. There is a small, bright-colored rag rug on the floor. Elijah is reading, his glasses perched on his nose, his face lit by the fire. Clara is knitting. She stops. She puts her hand on her belly. It is still flat, but she holds it. She gets up, walks to him. She takes his hand, the one that is scarred, the one that killed. She takes his hand, and she places it on her stomach. He looks up, confused. He looks at her hand, on his... He looks at her. She just smiles, a small, secret, terrified, and wondrous smile. His eyes, his gray, hard, winter eyes, they fill. He does not make a sound, but his eyes, they water. He pulls her down. His good arm, his strong arm, coming around her, pulling her onto his lap. He presses his face into her hair. Later that night, they are lying in the cot. The fire burned down to red-gold embers. The wind howls outside, a high, lonely sound against the logs. But inside, the cabin is warm. It is safe. She whispers into the darkness, her voice sleepy, content. You didn't win me, Elijah. He kisses her hair, his hand resting protectively over her belly. I gave myself to you. He holds her, and his voice is thick, his words a prayer. That's more, he replies, than I ever deserved. Outside, the wind howls, a wild, untamed thing. But inside their cabin, the firelight glows, warm and steady, and two people, once broken, hold each other like they finally found home. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it moved you. If you enjoyed it, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments. We love to see how far these tales travel. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one. And be sure to share your thoughts. We read every comment. Thank you.